Senate Bill 107 by Senator Wiener, an act relating to health care.
Senator Wiener.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 107 is back on concurrence. I had not intended to introduce this legislation when our session convened at the beginning of the year, but this past spring, starting in Texas, we saw a series of executive orders and laws being passed targeting transgender children and their families, specifically criminalizing the parents and providing that if a parent allows their transgender child to receive gender-affirming care, the parent would be guilty of a felony. In the case of Alabama, the parent goes to jail to state prison for 10 years. The child would then be taken away and put in foster care, and the physician would also be put in prison, even though the physician is providing care that is within the standards of care. We then put together this legislation with a broad coalition to make clear that if the families of trans children do not feel safe in their states, if they're being threatened, they can come to California and we will do what we can to protect them and to give them refuge here. So in that spirit, the bill prohibits the enforcement of a law of another state that goes in this direction in terms of criminalizing families relating to gender-affirming care. The bill also bars healthcare providers and others from complying with subpoenas requiring the disclosure of medical information relating to gender-affirming health care if it would interfere with a person's right to consent to their child receiving that care. The bill also prevents California law enforcement from cooperating with any individual or out-of-state agency to enforce these laws. And the bill would also prevent law enforcement participation in arrest or extradition to the extent allowed by the U.S. Constitution. So, colleagues, this is a law that will put California clearly on record as saying that we are there for these families and that we're not going to be a party to or enforce these vile laws. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Wiener. Members, discussion or debate? Senator Melendez.
Thank you, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, I rise in opposition to this bill for a number of reasons. First of all, I'm trying to think of some other situation in which California thinks it's okay to interfere between the relationship between a parent and a child. This bill says that if a married couple in, pick a state, Florida, Georgia, wherever, one parent says they think it's okay for their child to go through gender transition. The other parent says, no, absolutely not. The one parent could bring that child to California and seek that type of surgery or medical care for their child without the permission of the other parent, and California would say, we're okay with that. If you've had a child of your own, then you know the lengths you will go to protect your child and keep them from harm and do the very best you can to keep them safe and making sure that they're not making decisions that would cause them harm later on in life. This type of treatment, some of it is irreversible. I mean, if you're talking about surgery, there is no going back from that. During the hearing for this bill, there was a young person who testified about going through this transition and the regret that she had from doing so. She was young, she was impressionable, she got caught up in the movement, she got caught up in the fact that she was awkward as a child, had difficulty making friends, and found a subgroup on the internet that seemed to be very accepting of her and the challenges she was facing, and she got swept up in it. And she went through, with these changes, she went through having both of her breasts removed. And you don't go back from that. If you are a young man transitioning to a female, your genitalia is removed. You don't get to put that back. So if you're 14 and you go through this type of surgery, and later on, you discover that it's something you regret, you can't change it. You're not going to father children later on in your life because of the things that you did. And it does happen. I know that the supporters of this bill talk about they're trying to suggest that those of us who disagree with this bill, that somehow we want to keep these kids who are going through this in their lives, that we want to make them invisible. That is not the case. It's not the case. What I have seen in these committee hearings is those who support this bill try to make invisible those teens who have come forward to say, it was a mistake what I did. I wish the adults in my life had stopped me. I wish the adults in my life hadn't encouraged me to do this. I wish the adults in my life would have dug a little deeper to find out what was behind these feelings and help me work through that, rather than allow me to go forward with surgery, puberty blockers, a whole host of things that one can do, some of which are irreversible. I have 5 kids. Many of you have children of your own. And so you know, if you think back to when they were younger, they have a lot of different ideas about things they want to do. One day they want to be a teacher. The next day they want to be an Olympic swimmer. Another day they want to do something else. One day they're, in love with this particular thing. The next day they're not. They're changing. They're evolving. And to allow them to go through with some of the medical procedures that are being suggested here without a parent being able to intervene is wrong. And that's what this bill will allow. I don't disagree that we should make sure that kids in this category are protected and not bullied and not harassed, and provided some understanding and certainly any medical attention, mental health-wise, that they may need. But I don't think the state of California should be stepping in and facilitating that. That's not our place. If a child in another state, if their parent brought them to California for any other reason, to have them do something else that the other parent didn't agree with, we would never say, well, we will protect the parent who's going against the other parent's wishes, because it's not our place. And this is very serious. So it's not that people don't understand that this can be a difficult time for a young person, and the parents, frankly. But until you've had a child yourself, and you've watched them mature, and you've watched them grow, and you've watched them go through all the changes that they go through as an adolescent, you can never understand what it's like to be the parent who says, I don't think this is the right choice for my child. In the state of California, I don't want you to step in and get in the way of me doing what's best, or what I think is best for my child, and me helping my own child. It's not the job of any senator in here to do that, and certainly not the state of California. Again, I hope that you've done your research on this issue. Obviously, some of the measures taken aren't as extreme as removal of genitalia, but some are. But there's a whole host of things, and if you look at the other countries who are taking a step back now and saying, we actually think this can be very harmful for kids in the long run, in the end, because there is no good data to say that the use of these types of things like puberty blockers and things like that, there's no good long-term scientific studies that say that this does not cause long-term damage. I am certain someone is going to stand up and try to refute that, but I would urge you to Google it yourself, and you will see this is the exact reason why some of these other countries are taking a pause and saying, we actually don't think this is the best thing to do for kids. We really need to, pause this issue. So you can be sympathetic and understanding to those who are having thoughts about transitioning and the parents who are trying to help their kids. You can be sympathetic to that, but also be sympathetic to the parents who are raising them and their role in their child's life, and not interfere in that relationship between the parent and the child. With that, I urge a no vote.
I think you meant a no vote, but we'll take an aye vote. All right, members, further discussion or debate? Senator Pan.
Thank you, Madam President, Senators. I stand in support of the concurrence with Assembly amendments on SB 107. However, I think it's important that when we debate the issues here, that we actually not exaggerate and talk about the facts. So I am a parent. I'm raising two. I have one's a teenager, one's a preteen. So I know many of you here are parents. I'm also a pediatrician whose job is to help assist parents in, and advise them on their health. And I think it's important we talk about the facts. So first of all, there's actually, when it comes to surgery, because that was mentioned, there's no recommendation for surgery essentially before the child is no longer a child and is now the age of majority where they can make decisions on their own. So that is not what's recommended by the medical profession. And I think it's important not to actually exaggerate about that. We actually had, unfortunately, there are people who have done that on social media that's led to actually a bomb threat at a children's hospital recently. So I think it's important that we share accurate information and not incite these types of actions based on misinformation. I'd also make note there actually is research and studies, long-term studies, looking at puberty blockers. We also know that there's research showing that youth who are questioning their gender identity, that first of all, many of them don't change their minds. I'm not saying it never happens. But by the way, most of the treatments that we provide to youth of that age is reversible. For example, puberty blockers, right? And that denial of those treatments have long-term and significant consequences, including depression and suicidality. And we know that the rates of suicide in these youth is higher than it is in other youth, especially if they are not accepted. So when it comes to what our role is here in trying to protect the people of California, including our youth, we want to be sure that we not just Google, but actually talk to experts, people in the field, people who actually work on these issues, I'd say every day, but at least frequently, who actually spend time investigating these issues and learn the facts and use those facts to make our decisions. So I realize people may come to different conclusions, but let's at least start off with what is actually true and not make our decisions based on exaggerations or inaccuracies. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Pan. Senator Min.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of this bill. I have a nephew who's trans, who's about 12 years old. And I echo the concerns raised by my colleague from San Francisco. It's unfortunate that we need this bill, but the fact is that there's a lot of bullying happening right now. There's a lot of bullies out there in elected positions that are passing laws designed to try to punish and intimidate people just because they're different than the majority. And so we live in an era, unfortunately, where we in this state, with our progressive and inclusive values, need to demonstrate that we are going to be a sanctuary, that these types of punitive and I would argue unconstitutional laws will not be abided by or respected in the state. So I hear the concerns of my colleague from Lake Elsinore, but I think we in this state have a mission, we have a responsibility to try to uphold the rights of everyone against those who would try to bully and intimidate them. So I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Min. Senator Dolly.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, question to the author, if I may.
Senator Wiener, will you take a question?
Yeah.
Please proceed.
What is the age, what's the age of this that you can actually make that decision? What is the age? We're trying to find it here in the text.
So,
Please proceed.
thank you. You know, it's really interesting, with all respect to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are frankly debating a different bill. Just some of the gross distortions that we've heard about this bill are just frankly over the top. And in terms of gender-affirming care, that is a medical issue. That is a medical issue determined by healthcare providers under standards of professional health care, This bill does not write what the medical standards are for gender-affirming care. There are bodies that set those standards. There are peer-reviewed studies, and we can go through, I'm not going to do it today, all the peer-reviewed scientific literature about how gender-affirming care has so many benefits for these trans kids. And so we have ages of consent in California. Parents can also consent, and I think it's also really important to understand what's happening here, what is in this bill, and that is that parents are being criminalized in other states for consenting to health care for their children. So these are children, and the parents are consenting. This whole notion that this is getting between a kid and their parents is bogus. Parents are consenting and then being told you're a felon for consenting to that gender-affirming care for your trans child.
Thank
Senator
you,
Dolly.
Madam President. I didn't hear an answer in that other than the fact that there is no age, basically. The age can be determined by a panel of people or some scientific data that's out there. But let's just really boil it down here. This is about if you have a situation where you have one parent, say they're split up and they have a child and one parent's for it and the other's against it, the state now will be in the middle of that decision between those parents. And I think that's a very unfortunate situation that this bill would put those two parents in and the child at the same time. As a father of 3 children, this bill is basically putting the state in your home. I mean, we've heard so much about how, what is the age appropriate for imprisoning somebody or letting somebody out, or there was a bill just recently about last year about a 25-year-old really didn't know what they were doing, so they should be let out of prison for their younger crimes. And how does that relate to this bill? This relates to this bill because there is no age. Apparently, there's no age that you can do gender-affirming treatments on a child where the parents may disagree on that. So I just think that it's time for California to, get out of the way of parents and let them work with their children. And look, if they're an adult, let them make the decision. I have no problem with that. If they want to make that decision with an adult, but as we've heard, and those of us who have raised children, they really don't know what their identity is. It may change many times in their youth. All of us probably went through that ourselves. I know certainly I did, in trying to figure out what my values were going to be and what the future looked like for me. And it changed many times, and it will in my children's lives. And as a parent, I want to come alongside them. I don't want to be divided up by split homes or the government deciding who's going to do what with my child. So for those reasons, I oppose SB 107.
Thank you, Senator Dolly. Senator Melendez?
Thank you. I have just a couple more quick points to make. The author talked about the depression and the anxiety and the stress that these kids go through. But what he didn't talk about was the anxiety and stress and depression that many of them go through after they've gone through this type of surgery or this type of transition. And that is very real, and you cannot deny that, and you cannot say that those kids who now regret their decision are invisible. The second thing I would like to point out is just something I was thinking about. A friend of mine who is separated from her child's father, and she wants to be able to take her child to see a psychologist. He's having some issues, not gender related, just some issues. And she cannot do that without the permission of her ex-husband. She cannot get that child the medical treatment that she thinks is proper for her kid without the permission from the husband. But this bill is saying that in this particular case, because of this particular issue, if you're coming from out of state, you can do that in California and no one will interfere with you. That does not square up with me. Again, I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Senator Melendez. Members, further discussion or debate? Seeing and hearing none, Senator Wiener, you may close.
Thank you, Madam President. You know, I know that my friends on the other side of the aisle and their political party is really into the culture wars around trans kids and views as some sort of winning political issue. And we see, unfortunately, this party throughout the country trying to score cheap political points on the backs of these children. And I understand we can have whatever culture wars that we want to have, and people can. I'm sorry, Madam President, I am speaking very much to the bill.
Yes, yeah.
And what we've seen in the arguments today is trying to play into this culture war in delegitimizing and erasing trans kids. And that's what this is about. And they're debating not even what this bill actually is. When we look at what this bill doesn't put the state into people's homes. What's putting the state into people's homes is when other states like Texas and Alabama are saying that if you allow your trans kid to get health care, you're a criminal and we're going to put you in state prison. That's getting in between a parent and a child. That's what this bill is trying to protect against. There's been a distortion of what the courts in California can and can't do. All this bill does is allows California courts to make that custody determination. This doesn't prevent if one parent is committing a crime or is acting badly, the custody court can take that into account. So the bill that's being debated on the other side of the aisle, with all due respect, is so distorted in terms of what this bill actually does. This is about making sure that trans kids and their families are not being criminalized and torn apart by other states, and that California is not going to enforce these vile, hateful laws, and that if they feel unsafe and feel the need to come to California to be safe, we're going to have their backs. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Wiener. And just a reminder, members can close in the way in which they see fit. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen? Archuleta? Aye. Atkins? Bates? No. Becker? Aye. Borges? No. Bradford? Aye. Caballero? Aye. Cortese? Aye. Dowley? No. Dodd? Aye. Durazo? Aye. Eggman? Aye. Glazer? Aye. Gonzalez? Aye. Grove? No. Hertzberg? Wesso? Aye. Hurtado? Aye. Jones? No. Kamlager? Aye. Laird? Aye. Leyva? Aye. Limon? Aye. McGuire? Aye. Melendez? No. Min? Aye. Newman? Aye. Nielsen? No. Ochoa Bogue? No. Pan? Aye. Porcentino? Aye. Roth? Aye. Rubio? Aye. Skinner? Aye. Stern? Aye. Umberg? Aye. Wachowski? Aye. Wiener? Aye. Wilk? No.
Please call the absent members.
Allen? Aye. Atkins? Aye. Hertzberg?
Ayes 30, noes 9. The measure passes. The Assembly amendments are concurred in.